Hello, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we are going to discuss the important issues appearing in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 16th November 2019. The news to be discussed has been reflected on your screen, and time stamping for the same has been provided in your description box below. So, let's start our today's discussion. Now, the first news appears on page number 10 in the editorial section. It says 5 in 1. BRICS countries need greater connectivity and more intergrouping trade to get ahead. So, the focus of this editorial is that the countries of BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are not trading enough among themselves. And as of now, all the trade between these countries forms only 15% of the global trade. And this editorial in this aspect has said that this needs to be improved so that it not only helps these countries with respect to their economic growth but also with respect to decreasing unemployment in their countries. In this regard, even the Prime Minister of India has asked the BRICS countries to increase trade among themselves. So let us understand this editorial in this aspect of the recent 2019 BRICS summit which held in Brasilia in Brazil. Now from your prelims examination, this topic forms a part of current events of international importance, and from your mains, it gets covered under GS paper 2, specifically with respect to important international institutions. Now you can see this particular question. This was asked in the year 2015 of UPSC prelims. The question was, the Fortaleza Declaration recently in news is related to the affairs of. Options were ASEAN, BRICS, OECD, and WTO. So we understand that different declaration signed at different summits also becomes important with respect to a particular year. So UPSC can ask about 2019 BRICS declaration or the theme adopted in the 2019 BRICS summit. So in this regard, let us understand what this editorial has to mention. Now this editorial mentions that considering the problems with respect to slowing world economy, problems in trade negotiations, and also certain questions being raised on the legitimacy of WTO, that is World Trade Organization, this particular 11th BRICS summit of 2019 which held in Brasilia has come at an opportune time. Because the problems faced by BRICS countries individually has helped the BRICS as a group to find its relevance as well as importance in this era of economic slowdown. Further, these problems, specifically with respect to economic challenges, has also helped the BRICS group or the countries of BRICS to consolidate on the above issues and also march ahead together in a particular direction. So, this editorial says that effectively the time is right for the BRICS countries to move ahead together on various issues at hand. And the theme for the 11th BRICS summit was economic growth for an innovative future. So, having understood this, let us also go through certain basics about BRICS. Now, as already mentioned, that BRICS is a group composed by 5 major emerging countries, or we can say 5 major emerging economies, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, as well as South Africa. And these together represents around 42% of the population, 23% of world GDP, and 30% of world territory, and around 18% of global trade. Now, the figure highlighted in this editorial is with respect to intra-BRICS trade, which is roughly at around 15%. Now, further, this highlights that this particular term, that is BRIC or BRIC, was coined by Goldman Sachs in 2001. And this word was coined to indicate the emerging powers during those times apart from United States. However, when the term BRIC was coined, South Africa was not part of it. It says that in 2011, South Africa joined the group and then BRICS reached its final composition, and finally this group had a country from the African continent. Another important aspect in this regard is that in 2006, BRIC countries started their dialogue, which since 2019 takes place at annual meetings of heads of the state and government. So we can say that the dialogue started by the BRICS countries has resulted in a summit meeting which takes place every year. Now, this understanding about BRICS becomes important because a question on BRICS was asked by UPSC in the year 2014. Let's go through the question to understand that why this information is important for us. The question was, with reference to a grouping of countries known as BRICS, consider the following statements. First, the first summit of BRICS was held in Rio de Janeiro in 2009. And second, South Africa was the last to join the BRICS grouping. So we understand that you also need to know about the first summit of BRICS which was held. And the second statement is about South Africa. Now we have read that this particular statement is correct. However, let us find about the correctness or incorrectness of the first statement. Now as you can see, it says that the first BRICS summit happened in 2009 in Russia in the city of Yekaterinburg. This summit in Yekaterinburg in Russia was followed by the summit in Brasilia in 2010, Sanya summit in China in 2011, a summit in New Delhi in 2012, the Durban summit in 2013, the Fortaleza summit in 2014, on which a question was asked in the year 2015 prelims examination, UFA summit in 2014, Goa summit in 2016, Xiamen summit in 2017, and Johannesburg summit in 2018. So the 2019 summit has taken place in Brazil. So in this we understand that the first statement is incorrect as the first summit was held in Yekaterinburg in Russia. So in this the question was, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer was B, that is 2 only. So after understanding the basics of BRICS, let us go through the highlights as presented in this particular editorial. Now with respect to BRICS, this editorial says that both India and China, with their growth and optimistic economy, has helped the BRICS as a group to find its relevance and importance in the era of economic slowdown. And this is despite the fact that there has been instances of slowdown in Brazil, in South Africa, and even Russia is facing certain slowdown because of certain sanctions imposed on it. So despite these challenges, both India and China emerges as a ray of hope with respect to their growing economy, and also it provides an optimism to the entire group. So this editorial in this aspect says that despite these different challenges faced individually by each countries, the group as a whole has adapted to these challenging times and in a way has proven their resilience. Now we can say this because despite these economic challenges faced by each of these countries and despite the different political directions of each of these 5 countries, they still in the 2019 summit in Brazil have tried to build a common vision for world's economic future, and this has been done with an emphasis on multilateralism. And this is also reflected in the joint statement issued in Brasilia, which publicly denounced the concept of unilateral and protectionist actions taken by different countries in the world. Now, in this regard, let us understand the concept of multilateralism and also differentiate it with protectionist policies. Now, multilateralism is a situation where different countries of the world or organizations or groups work together to achieve certain common goals or objectives, or they work together to deal with a common problem. Whereas protectionism refers to a trade policy which effectively protects domestic industries from unfair competition with respect to products or services originating from foreign countries. So we can say that protectionist measures is an economic policy of restricting imports from other countries, and this can be done through different methods such as increasing tariffs on imported goods, imposing quotas on number of imported goods, and number of other government regulations. So it was in this aspect that the 2019 declaration of BRICS emphasized on multilateralism and thereby issued a joint statement which publicly denounced unilateral and protectionist actions of the different countries of the world. Now, in their declaration, the BRICS countries also repeated their commitment with respect to WTO, and this was done despite US reluctance. Further, the BRICS countries also agreed on a vision for rules based, transparent, non discriminatory, open, free, and inclusive international trade. So, the emphasis was more on open, inclusive, as well as free trade among the BRICS members. Now, this editorial has also highlighted certain important aspects with respect to India. Now, this editorial highlights that the joint statement is equally important for India considering its sluggish economic growth, increasing unemployment in the region, and the recent unacceptability of India with respect to RCEP agreement. Now, the failure of India to resolve RCEP issues with its trading partners had raised certain suspicion and question as to whether India will reverse its openness to trade as well as liberalization policies which began in the early 90s. Now, in this regard, Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping has used the BRICS platform wisely and have continued talks on bringing India back into the RCEP fold. Further, both India and China have also focused on resolving their trade issues through the recently launched mechanism led by their finance minister. Now, with respect to increasing intra-BRICS trade, that is, trade among the BRICS members, Prime Minister of India has said that intra-BRICS trade and investment targets must be more ambitious, and in this regard has invited suggestions from different countries, as an increasing intra-BRICS trade will further reduce the cost of trade between the BRICS countries. Further, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has asked the BRICS members that by the next BRICS summits, they must identify at least 5 areas whereby they can make joint ventures. Now, important initiatives such as BRICS Network as well as BRICS Institution for Future Network were also discussed in the BRICS Summit. And further, the Prime Minister also requested the private sector to join these efforts focused on human resources. He also suggested that 5 countries should also consider a mutual social security agreement. So these are all suggestions as highlighted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the BRICS Summit of 2019. So considering all these aspects, this editorial has also highlighted certain concerns. Let us go through these concerns and also a way forward. Now, with respect to concerns, this editorial mentions that despite a cumulative population of around 40% of BRICS countries, trade among these countries is still only at around 15% of the world trade, the aspect which we have already seen. So, on this account, this editorial says that the BRICS countries needs to take serious action to improve trade among them, as it will not only help to increase trade among these BRICS nations but will also help in sustaining growth and creating more jobs for the people of the country. And in this regard, the suggestions given by Prime Minister Narendra Modi becomes very important with respect to increasing intra-BRICS trade among the 5 countries. So as a way forward, this editorial mentions that greater connectivity as well as more trade will help the BRICS countries to claim their rightful space in the world. And this will eventually provide the necessary leadership and energy which the global economic order needs urgently. Thus, this editorial becomes important both from our mains as well as prelims perspective. Now, the next news for discussion also appears on page number 10 in the editorial section. It says, Crossed wires. For the next wave of growth through digitalization, telecom regulation must be fair. Now, this editorial effectively talks about the financial stress which the telecom sector, particularly by major telecom companies, are facing. And this is because of a latest Supreme Court judgment. Now, the whole issue of concern was with respect to calculating revenue for the government. And for this purpose, the government wanted to include both core activities as well as non-core activities of the telecom sector, whereas the telecom sector wanted only to include the core activities associated with telecom sector. So this was the fight between the telecom companies on one hand, that they wanted to include only the core activities while calculating revenue for the government, whereas the government wanted to include the non-core activities of the telecom sector as well. So effectively, a Supreme Court judgment has settled this dispute and has said that while calculating revenue, both core activities and non-core activities of the telecom sector will be included to calculate adjusted gross revenue for the telecom sector. So let us understand the nuances of the Supreme Court judgment as well as the impact on the telecom sector with respect to this particular judgment on calculating revenue for the government, including core as well as non-core activities with respect to the telecom sector. Now this topic becomes important both from your prelims as well as mains perspective. In your prelims it gets covered under economy, and in your mains it gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically with respect to issues relating to Indian economy as well as infrastructure. So in this backdrop, this editorial mentions that two leading and important players in the telecom sector, that is Bharti Airtel as well as Vodafone Idea, have registered huge losses in their second quarter of this fiscal. And this loss has been registered because of the Supreme Court judgment, which effectively defined the concept of adjusted gross revenue. So in this aspect, first of all, let us understand about adjusted gross revenue. Now, as already discussed, revenue for the telecom sector comes from both core activities of the sector as well as from the non-core activities of the sector. The core activities include telecom services as well as cellular services, that is with respect to call as well as data, whereas non-core activities includes sale of mobile handsets, sale of assets such as land, as well as interest income on bank deposits by these companies in the telecom sector. Now the whole issue with respect to the fight between government on one hand and the telecom sector on the other hand was the definition of adjusted gross revenue for the telecom sector. Now this fight became important because telecom operators are supposed to give spectrum usage charges as well as license fee to the government, and both these are calculated in terms of percentage of adjusted gross revenue. Now as already stated, the claim by the telecom sector was to include only the core activities of their sector, whereas the claim of the government was also to include the non-core activities of the telecom sector, as it would have helped the government to earn more revenue. And this is because both spectrum usage charges as well as license fee are calculated in terms of percentage of adjusted gross revenue for the telecom sector. So if both core activities as well as non-core activities of the telecom sector are included with respect to calculating adjusted gross revenue, then definitely the revenue of the government would increase. And this particular aspect was not favored by the telecom companies or the telecom operators, as they wanted only the core activities to be included with respect to adjusted gross revenue. However, the Supreme Court in its judgment has clarified that for the telecom sector, adjusted gross revenue will include both core activities as well as non-core activities. And on top of that, the Supreme Court has said that this particular adjusted gross revenue shall be calculated from the year 2005 onwards. So basically this judgment has a retrospective impact. So it means that the adjusted gross revenue for the sector will include penalty, interest, spectrum usage charges as well as license fee since 2005 onwards, that is from 2005 to 2019, and cumulatively for the entire telecom sector this amounts to rupees 1.4 lakh crores. Now the impact of this judgment will be huge in terms of economic losses to the major telecom operating companies in India. Now this ruling of Supreme Court with respect to adjusted gross revenue becomes important from a UPSC perspective as well, because this in a way also has an impact not only on the telecom sector but also on the associated sectors. So let's go through the impact of this particular judgment. Now, the first impact of this judgment will be an adverse impact on the ability of the telecom sector to pay back to the government, both in terms of penalty as well as with respect to previous loans. Now, already the debt of the telecom sector is way too high, and now after this Supreme Court judgment, they have to pay additional amount to the government, specifically with respect to calculation of adjusted gross revenue from the year 2005 onwards. Thus, effectively, this decision will have an adverse impact on the ability of the telecom sector to pay back their loans, including penalty. Now, as a result of this judgment and also because of previous loans, this will result in higher payouts to the government, and this will leave these telecom operating companies with very less money or very less finance. So effectively, since these companies will be left with very less money, so there would be very less investment in new age technologies such as 5G or artificial intelligence. And further, less investment of the telecom operating companies in the new age technologies will further have an adverse impact on the government's program with respect to digital revolution. Now, huge payouts to the government in forms of penalties and loans will ultimately have an adverse impact on the finance of most of the telecom operating companies, and this will effectively leave only a handful of companies. So in a way, this will also result in monopolization of telecom market by a select few companies. And ultimately, because of huge payouts to the government, the telecom operators will be forced to pass on the burden to the consumers, and this will effectively result in increasing in the price of various telecom services. So these can be said to be some of the major impacts of this particular Supreme Court judgment, specifically with respect to adjusted gross revenue calculated on both core as well as non-core activities of the telecom sector since 2005. So after understanding the impacts of this judgment, let us go through certain concerns of the telecom operators as has been highlighted in this particular editorial. Now, talking about the concern of telecom operators, this editorial says that both the major telecom operators, that is Vodafone and Airtel, have to pay a cumulative penalty of roughly around rupees 80,000 crore. And both these operators have told the government that if the government does not help them in clearing their dues, specifically with respect to arrears of revenue, then their existence will certainly be in doubt, and this also might result in collapse of these companies. Further, Vodafone in particular has said that it will exit India if these concerns are not addressed by the government. So, collapse of any of the telecom operators or exiting of these telecom operators from India will not only put a strain on Indian economy but will also have an adverse impacts on jobs in the country, not only in the telecom sector but also in the associated sectors. So with respect to the concerns of telecom operators, the government has constituted a committee of secretaries which will be headed by the cabinet secretary, that is Rajiv Gauba. And this committee is currently studying different ways in which the telecom industry can be bailed out. So considering the impact of this judgment as well as concerns of the telecom operators, this particular editorial has provided a way forward. Let us go through it. The editorial mentions that the government needs to revisit its policies on telecom sector, including addressing the validity of a license fee in the form of revenue share, so that the issues raised by the telecom operators can be solved quickly. Further, it says that the government should also needs to look into the fairness of the regulatory policies as well as approaches, and the government must ensure that these regulatory policies and approaches to the policies are unbiased. And in the end, this editorial says that telecom industry is crucial to India's next wave of growth through the process of digitization And in this regard, the government should rather focus on balanced growth of the telecom sector rather than pursuing single agenda of revenue earning. So this editorial effectively says that the whole focus of the government must be on a balanced growth of the telecom sector rather than pursuing the single agenda of revenue earning. So after understanding this whole issue, it is clear that a balanced growth of the telecom sector is important and it is crucial for the government to step in at the right time. Thus, this particular Supreme Court judgment becomes important with respect to having an understanding of the issues faced by the telecom sector. The next news appears on page number 13. It says Centre drops plan to bring in changes to Forest Act of 1927, and this was attempted through Indian Forest Act of 2019, which was a draft law as proposed by the central government. Now this draft law was also sent to states in India. However, certain states like Mizoram objected to certain provisions in the amended draft law. So in this regard, since an amendment had been attempted with respect to Indian Forest Act of 1927, so let us go through some of the basic aspects or basic points with respect to Indian Forest Act of 1927. Now from a prelims perspective, this topic becomes important with respect to general issues on environment. Now this topic of Indian Forest Act 1927 was comprehensively covered in the Prelims Compass magazine for environment. Now this part also highlighted that the Ministry of Environment and Forest has started the process to comprehensively amend the Forest Act of 1927. So in this regard, it says that the Indian Forest Act of 1927 provides for a legal framework for protection and management of forest, transit of forest produce and timber, and the duty leviable on timber and other forest produce. So these are the three main areas regulated or governed through the Indian Forest Act of 1927. It highlights that it is an umbrella act which provides the basic architecture for the management of forest in the country, including the procedure to be followed to declare an area to be a reserved forest, a protected forest, or a village forest. So declaration of any area as reserve forest, protected forest, or village forest has been provided under the Indian Forest Act of 1927. And under this, state government has the power to declare any area as reserve forest, protected forest, or village forest. It further states that the Act defines what a forest offence is, what are the acts prohibited inside a reserved forest, and also certain penalties which can be levied on the violations of provisions of this Act. Now, various reports such as MB Shah report of 2010 and TSR Subramaniam report of 2015 had also suggested to enact a new law with respect to Indian Forest Act of 1927. So it was on the basis of these committee reports that the government of India had drafted a new act to replace the Indian Forest Act of 1927. Now since the government has withdrawn the draft law which was proposed earlier, so let us wait for the final act or final legislation with respect to Indian forest. Now the next news appears as a lead article on page number 10. It says treating education as a public good. Now in this article the author has favored that education must be treated as a public good and the government should not look for any profit motive out of education. So this topic becomes important with the perspective of GS paper 2, specifically with respect to issues relating to education. Now, a committee led by Chairman Dr. Kasturi Ranjan has submitted Draft Education Policy 2019 to the Ministry of Human Resource and Development. And the government, through this new Draft Education Policy of 2019, is trying to meet the changing dynamics of the requirements of population, specifically with respect to providing quality education to the students, providing an atmosphere of innovation and research, and also with an aim to make India a knowledge superpower. And this will be achieved by equipping our students with the necessary skills as well as knowledge, as it will further help in eliminating the shortage of manpower in the field of science, technology, academics, as well as industry. So, broadly, this can be said to be the purpose for which the new Education Policy 2019 has been drafted. And this new education policy of 2019 provides for the reforms in the fields of school education, higher education, and it also provides for reforms in the field of additional key focus areas which includes technology in education, vocational education, as well as adult education. Further, the new education policy also provides to constitute a Rashtra Shiksha Ayog or National Education Commission. Now, the objective of Rashtra Shiksha Ayog is to ensure synergetic functioning of India's education system in order to deliver equity and excellence at all levels, from vision to implementation. And this body will be chaired by the or headed by the Prime Minister of India. It further says that the Rashtra Shiksha Ayog will be responsible for developing, articulating, implementing, evaluating, and revising the vision of education in the entire country. Further, even states may set up state level bodies called Raj Shiksha Ayog or the State Education Commission. So, these commission can be established at two levels, that is, at the central level, which shall be called the Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog, as well as at the state level, which shall be called the Rajya Shiksha Ayog. So, after understanding certain basics with respect to National Education Policy of 2019, let us go through certain positive, negatives, as well as way forward, as has been suggested in this particular article, specifically with respect to this National Education Policy of 2019. Now, the author in this article says that the National Education Policy of 2019 is a major improvement over the previous educational policies, as it gives good focus on school education, higher education, as well as other key areas like adult education. Further, it also provides special attention to technology as well as promotion of arts and culture. Next, the positive is that it also talks about a apex body, that is Rashtra Shiksha Ayog, and the financial aspects to make quality education affordable for all. Next, it talks about re-establishing teachers as the most respected members of our society. Now, this is an important social aspect to this particular National Education Policy of 2019. Further, under the policy, it has been proposed to set up a National Research Foundation, as it will enable a culture of research to reach all our universities in the entire country. So these can be said to be some of the positives with respect to National Education Policy of 2019. Now, this article has also highlighted certain negatives with respect to New Education Policy of 2019. First, it says that the commitment of the government to double the expenditure on education from 10% to 20% over a period of 10 years is quite insufficient, as this will not be sufficient enough to address or meet the existing challenges faced by schools all across the countries. Further, the article says that treatment of education as market good by the government is not good, and rather education must be treated as a public good. And in this regard, the article says that too much interference by the private sectors in the field of education is not good, and it is the duty of the state to take care of education at all levels, including at the levels of schools as well as universities. Now, as per the new education policy, universities have been divided into the categories of premier, teaching, as well as colleges, where the premier universities will be primarily for the purpose of research and development, teaching universities, where the primary focus would be on teaching and also to produce academicians, and college will provide basic education, where academicians will be allotted. So, as per the new education policies, the funding pattern shall be allocated as per these categories or as per this division. However, the article says that this will not help in any way. That is, this categorization of universities will not help in any way, and it is not natural. Because if we see our premier institutes such as IITs or even IIMs, then both research and teaching goes simultaneously. So to bifurcate research as well as teaching will not serve any purpose. So these are some of the aspects highlighted in this article, specifically with respect to the new education policy of 2019. The next news on discussion appears on page number 1 as well as on page number 15 extensively, Now this news is with respect to Supreme Court judgment which has overturned a ruling of NCLAT, that is National Companies Law Tribunal. And this judgment is with respect to giving priority to either financial creditor or operational creditor. Now, the NCLAT in its ruling had put both financial creditor and operational creditor on same level, that is at par. However, Supreme Court of India has reversed this judgment of NCLAT with respect to priority of financial creditor or operational creditor and has said that as per the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, it is the financial creditor which takes precedence over the operational creditor and has also said that unequals cannot be treated equally. So from your prelims perspective, this topic forms a part of Indian economy, and from your mains, this gets covered under GS paper 3. And this topic is important from the point of view of UPSC because of Supreme Court's ruling on IBC, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and also with respect to giving priority either to financial creditor or operational creditor in case of defaulting on loan. So in this backdrop, let us understand the story behind whatever happened and also the judgment of Supreme Court of India. Now in this story, Essar Steel defaulted to the tune of rupees 54,000 crores both with respect to financial creditors as well as operational creditors. Now financial creditors are those institutions or companies which provides long-term capital in the form of loans, and they are generally public sector banks or private sector banks, whereas operational creditors are those institutions which enable or which help in supplying certain raw materials as well as other materials. So with respect to Essar Steel, the financial creditor were public sector banks such as State Bank of India, and the operational creditors were Bharat Petroleum, Indian Oil, ONGC, NTPC and other PSUs. So, when Essar Steel defaulted on their loan worth 54,000 crores, both of financial creditor and operational creditor, then the financial creditors led by SBI decided to initiate insolvency proceedings against this Essar Steel. Now, ArcelorMittal decided to overtake the Essar Steel and in the process proposed to pay rupees 42,000 crore to clear the default of Essar Steel. And this proposal of ArcelorMittal was also approved by the Committee of Creditors as per the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code. Now, as per Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, during the insolvency resolution process, a committee consisting of lenders would be constituted for taking decisions by voting on the resolution process. So, according to the proposals cleared by the Committee of Creditors with respect to ArcelorMittal, it gave precedence to the financial creditor over the operational creditor. And this was also done as per the provisions of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, specifically with respect to insolvency resolution process. So we can say that as per the insolvency resolution process of IBC, the Committee of Creditors gave precedence to financial creditors to take back their money over the or before the operational creditor. So if this would have implemented, then financial creditors would have got much higher percentage in return as compared to the operational creditors. So after the decision of Committee of Creditors, this decision was challenged by the operational creditors in National Company Law Tribunal. Now before the NCLAT, the operational creditors argued that they must be treated on par with the financial creditors. That is, they must be treated equally with the financial creditors. In response, the NCLAT ruled that rupees 42,000 crore would be divided in a manner where both financial creditor as well as the operational creditor would be able to recover equal percentage of their dues. So effectively, NCLAT said that rupees 42,000 crore must be divided in a way that both operational creditor as well as financial creditor receive the same percentage of their dues. So effectively, the operational creditor received 12,000 crore and the financial creditor received 30,000 crore of the rupees 42,000 crores. So effectively NCLAT ruled that financial creditors and operational creditors have to be treated equally with respect to recovery of their dues. Now, this particular ruling of NCLAT was challenged in the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court has effectively struck down the decision of NCLAT, where they have said that both operational creditors and financial creditors have to be treated equally with respect to recovery of their dues. The Supreme Court in this case was of the opinion that the financial creditors are much more important as compared to operational creditors. And this is because the financial creditors provide the working capital to enable the companies to run their operations. Hence, the Supreme Court said that the equality principle cannot be stretched to treat unequals equally. And effectively, the Supreme Court upheld the decision taken by the Committee of Creditors. Further, the Supreme Court also held that NCLAT should not interfere with the business decision taken by the requisite majority of Committee of Creditors, which is in conformity with the law with respect to insolvency and bankruptcy code. So effectively the Supreme Court upheld the decision or approved the decision taken by the Committee of Creditors and struck down the decision of NCLAT. Now, with respect to extension of deadline for resolution, the time limit for resolution process is 330 days in all cases. Further, the Supreme Court was of the opinion that at times cases could be delayed due to delays in judicial proceedings, and hence the companies should not suffer unduly for the restriction of 330 days. So effectively, the Supreme Court has decided to extend the 330-day limit as provided in the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code if the parties are able to prove that delay has been caused mainly due to delay in judicial proceedings. Hence, the Supreme Court in this case has delivered a landmark judgment which has enabled the world's largest steel maker ArcelorMittal to take over Essar Steel under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. Now, this particular ruling of the Supreme Court of India is considered to be important for a number of reasons. Let's go through these reasons. Now, firstly, this judgment will help in expediting the process of recoveries with respect to various non-performing assets. And the Supreme Court has also put to rest various legal issues which arose from time to time with respect to implementation of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, specifically with respect to settling of dues of financial creditors as well as operational creditors. Further, this ruling would enable the banks to recover around 85% of their bad loans which they had lent to Essar Steel, and this is a very good recovery rate as compared to the average recovery rates of 53% only. And lastly, the Supreme Court has also decided to extend the time limit of 330 days as decided or as set under the IBC code in case of judicial delays. So overall, we can say that this judgment of the Supreme Court will actually bring about a paradigm change in the case of resolution process under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So in this judgment, effectively, the Supreme Court has overruled the decision of NCLAT, which had put both operational creditors as well as financial creditors on equal level. So effectively in this case, the Supreme Court has upheld the decision of Committee of Creditors and have said that the financial creditors have to be given preference over the operational creditors. The next news appears on page number 8. It says that saving sparrows in Godavari one nest at a time. Now, with respect to preliminary examination, this topic forms a part of general issues on environmental ecology as well as biodiversity. So in this news, let us learn certain basic facts about sparrows. Now, the scientific name of sparrow is Passer domesticus, and this is a native to most of Europe, Mediterranean basin, and also a large part of Asia. Now, the sparrow is also found in parts of Australasia, Africa, as well as in the America. Further, the house sparrow is strongly associated with human habitation and can live in urban or rural settings. Both these points becomes important from our prelims perspective. Further, sparrow is the state bird of Delhi. Now this information again becomes an important information for your prelims perspective. And with respect to IUCN Red List, this bird is listed as least concern. However, as of now, the number of sparrow is depleting. So, in this backdrop, let's go through certain reasons with respect to depletion in the number of sparrows. One of the main reasons are rapidly changing infrastructure of cities which are inhabitable for bird species. As modern infrastructure does not account for space with respect to sparrow to make their nests. Further, sharp rise in radiation pollution caused by microwave towers is also one of the major reasons for depleting or declining in the number of sparrows in urban areas. And further, increased use of pesticides has resulted in decreasing the prey for these birds. And also because of this, we find a decline in the number of sparrows. So all these aspects becomes important from our prelims perspective with respect to sparrows. Dear students, unfortunately yesterday there was a mistake in the practice question of the day in the DNS of 15th November 2019. Now this topic of right to information is an important aspect. So first of all, in this regard, let us go through the concept of public authority as mentioned under Right to Information Act, and then we'll come back to this practice question with respect to RTI. Now it says that public authority means any authority or body or institution of self-government established or constituted either by or under the constitution, by any other law made by parliament, by any other law made by state legislature, or by notification issued or order made by appropriate government. And public authority also includes any body owned, controlled, or substantially financed, and any non-government organization substantially financed, either directly or indirectly by funds provided by the appropriate government. So this is the complete definition of public authority as per the RTI Act of 2005. Now moving further, let us go through some of the important aspects of section 24 of RTI Act. Now this section says that the RTI Act shall not apply to intelligence and security organizations specified in the second schedule to this particular act. However, there is certain exception with respect to this section of RTI. It says, provided that the information pertaining to the allegations of corruption and human rights violation shall not be excluded under this subsection. So it means if any officer of these intelligence agencies or security organizations is accused of any corruption or human rights violation, then such activities can come within the purview of RTI. So, after understanding the concept of public authority and section 24 of RTI Act, let's go through the practice questions for the day. Question number 1. It says, which of the following has been completely excluded from the purview of Right to Information Act 2005? First, human rights violation done by officers of intelligence agencies. No, this is not completely excluded from the purview of RTI. Second, Office of Chief Justice of India. No, as per the judgment of Supreme Court of India, the Office of CJI will come within the Office of RTI, that is Right to Information Act. Prime Minister's Office. No. NGOs substantially funded by the government. No, as we have already seen with respect to definition of public authority. So the question here now is select the correct answer from the code given below. So here the correct answer would be none of the above, as none of these options can be completely excluded from the purview of Right to Information Act. Now moving on to question number 2. It says consider the following statements about sparrow. First, it is a state bird of Delhi. Yes, this is correct. Second, it is found only in India and Sri Lanka. No, this is incorrect, as it can be found across the world including Europe and Mediterranean as well as Australasia. Third, the number of sparrows are on a decline in recent years. Yes, this is correct. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer here is A, that is 1 and 3 only. Practice question number 3. It says, consider the following statements. First, BRICS 2019 summit was held in Durban. No, this statement is incorrect as 2019 BRICS summit was held in Brasilia. Second, the theme of 2019 BRICS summit was economic growth for an innovative future. Yes, this is correct. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. Now moving on to question number 4 and question number 5. Question number 4, it says, consider the following statements. First, as per Supreme Court judgment, in cases of insolvency proceedings, operational creditors shall always be preferred over financial creditors for settling of dues. No, this is incorrect as it is just the reverse. Second, the 330-day limit fixed by Insolvency and Bankruptcy Court for completing resolution process of insolvency proceedings can be extended in case of judicial delays. Yes, this is correct as per the latest Supreme Court judgment. Third, the decision of Committee of Creditors has to be approved by at least 75% of the votes. No, this is incorrect as this was earlier the case. And after amendment, this percentage has been reduced to 66%. So this statement is also incorrect. So the question here is, which of the statements given above are correct? So here the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. Now moving on to question number 5. It says, consider the following statements about National Education Policy of 2019. First, it has proposed to create Rashtriya Shiksha Ayog at central level and Raj Shiksha Ayog at state levels respectively. Yes, this is correct. Second, it is based on a report submitted under the chairmanship of Dr. Vivek Oberoi. Now this is incorrect as the report has been submitted under the chairmanship of Dr. Kasturi Ranjan. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? So the correct answer here is A, that is 1 only. With this, we come to an end to discussion of today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.